Here's a real problem most marketers don't realize they're facing. And until that changes, no amount of better content, better ads, or better design is going to fix it. When a brand realizes it sounds generic, the instinct is almost always the same. Because they're trying to solve a thinking problem with a writing solution. The message defaults to what feels safe, familiar, and broadly agreeable. And hope it sticks. Will always feel like it's reaching instead of landing. Hey everyone, thanks for clicking into this video. My name is Colin, and I'm a full-time Chief Marketing Officer. And I like to get on here and share my thoughts and ideas. I like to give real-world insight, not just theory. Let's get into this week's video. Go ahead. Scroll through 10 brand websites in the same category, and pretty soon you'll notice they all start to blur together. High quality, customer first, built different, innovative solutions. Nothing is technically wrong with any of it, but none of it actually sticks. Most brands don't sound the same because they're lazy or uncreative. They sound the same because they're afraid. Afraid of saying the wrong thing. Afraid of narrowing their audience. Afraid of committing to a point of view that might exclude someone. So instead of choosing meaning, they choose safety. And safety produces sameness. I've seen this over and over again, especially inside growing companies. The brand gets just big enough that everyone wants consensus, alignment, and approval. And without realizing it, the message slowly shifts from clear to careful. That's when the language starts to flatten. You stop saying what you believe and start saying what sounds acceptable. You stop leading with meaning and start listing features. You stop signaling who you're for and start trying to appeal to everyone. And the result is a brand that works but doesn't resonate. Here's a real problem most marketers don't realize they're facing. If your brand message could belong to any company in your category, it doesn't belong to you. And until that changes, no amount of better content, better ads, or better design is going to fix it. Because the issue isn't execution, it's identity. Most brands know they need to stand out. That's not the issue. The issue is how they try to do it. When a brand realizes it sounds generic, the instinct is almost always the same. Change the words. New tagline or new headline, new positioning statement, or maybe a rebrand if things are feeling real stale. But here's the problem. Changing language without changing meaning doesn't create differentiation. It just creates variety. I've watched teams spend weeks wordsmithing copy, arguing over adjectives, debating tone, only to land on something that still feels interchangeable. Because they're trying to solve a thinking problem with a writing solution. Most differentiation efforts fail for one simple reason. They start at the surface. They ask questions like, how do we say this better? Or how do we sound more premium? How do we make this more exciting? Instead of asking, what do we actually believe? What do we stand for that others don't? What tension are we willing to own? And when those deeper questions aren't answered, the message defaults to what feels safe, familiar, and broadly agreeable. This is why you see brands chase tone trends, or adopt whatever language competitors are using, or borrow positioning from adjacent categories and hope it sticks. It's not that those brands lack creativity. It's that they're skipping the hard part. They want differentiation without conviction. And without conviction, all you get is cleverness. Clever headlines, clever campaigns, clever moments. But nothing people remember. And here's the uncomfortable truth. A brand that hasn't decided what it stands against will never be clear about what it stands for. And until that decision is made, everything downstream, messaging, content, campaigns, will always feel like it's reaching instead of landing. That's the trap most brands get stuck in. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Here's the shift that changed everything for me. Strong brands don't start with messaging, they start with meaning. This is where most marketing advice quietly gets it wrong. We talk about what to say before we ever decide what we believe. But humans don't connect to language first. They connect to meaning first. That's straight out of this awesome book called The Science of Storytelling. Our brains are constantly scanning for coherence, for patterns, for signals that tell us, this makes sense, this matters. And when a brand has no clear internal meaning, the audience feels it immediately, even if they can't articulate why. It shows up as, this feels generic, or this sounds like everyone else. I don't really get what makes them different. Not because the words are bad, but because there's no story logic underneath them. This is where StoryBrand and neuroscience overlap in a powerful way. StoryBrand teaches that clarity comes from knowing your role in the customer's journey. Neuroscience shows us that stories work because they organize information around beliefs, tension, cause and effect, and resolution. When your brand hasn't defined its belief system, your message has no gravity. So instead of pulling people in, it just floats. This is why two brands can sell similar products in the same category to the same audience, and one feels magnetic while the other feels forgettable. One has decided what it means to exist. The other is just trying to sound good. And this is where defining meaning becomes practical instead of abstract. Meaning doesn't live in a manifesto. It doesn't come from clever language. And it doesn't happen by trying to sound profound. Meaning has to be operational. If it doesn't change decisions, it's not real. Here's the simplest way I've learned to do this. Answer 4 questions. Not perfectly, not poetically, just honestly. First, what problem do we care about more than most people in our category? Not what we sell, not what features we have. What tension do we actually give a shit about? Confusion, complacency, fear, overwhelm, distrust, lack of confidence. Every strong brand is obsessed with a specific problem. If you don't know which one you're fighting, your message won't land because there's no emotional hook. Second, what do we believe that others don't say out loud? This is huge. Stories work because someone believes something strongly enough to act. Brands are no different. What belief sits underneath everything you do? What truth are you willing to repeat even when it's unconventional? If your belief is vague, your message will be too. Third, what outcome do we want people to experience, not just achieve? People don't buy outcomes. They buy the feeling of an outcome. Clarity, confidence, relief, control, belonging. If you can't articulate the emotional resolution your brand promises, your messaging will always default to features and tactics. And finally, what would we never do even if it worked. This is the constraint piece. Meaning only becomes powerful when it has limits. What language won't we use? What tactics don't fit us? What trends will we intentionally ignore? Because audiences don't just notice what you say, they notice what you refuse to say. When you answer these questions, something shifts. Your message develops edges. It feels intentional. It becomes repeatable without feeling boring. That's how meaning turns into strategy instead of fluff. But defining meaning isn't the finish line. It's the filter. Because meaning only matters if it actually changes what you do. If your brand beliefs live in a deck but not in your decisions, they're decoration, not strategy. Once meaning is defined, every piece of marketing has to answer one question. Does this reinforce what we want to be known for? Not, is it clever? Or not, will it get engagement? And not, is this trendy? Does it reinforce the meaning? And if it doesn't, it's out. That's why strong brands look consistent without feeling repetitive. They're not repeating tactics, they're repeating ideas. Content gets easier. Instead of asking, what should we post? You ask, what part of our meaning does this reinforce? Campaigns stop being random pushes and start becoming chapters in the same story. Same spine, different spotlight. And decisions get cleaner. No to partnerships that don't fit. No to trends that dilute the message. No to short-term wins that cost long-term trust. When meaning drives execution, you stop feeling reactive. You stop chasing relevance, and you start building memory. That's why this approach works. It aligns with how humans actually process information. People don't remember facts. They remember patterns and meaning. When your marketing consistently reinforces a clear belief, people know what you stand for. They trust you faster. They recognize you sooner, and they remember you longer. Most brands are loud. Very few are clear. And clarity wins. At the beginning of this video, we talked about why differentiation usually fails. Not because brands aren't trying, but because they start with words instead of meaning. So if you take one thing from this, let it be, differentiation doesn't come from saying something different. It comes from believing something strongly enough to build around it. When meaning leads, messaging follows. When messaging follows, execution simplifies. And when execution simplifies, brands scale. That's the work. That's the shift. And that's how brands stop blending in. Thank you for watching. Hit me up in the comments. Subscribe if you found this valuable. And I will see you next week.